So if you have a Gemara Sukkah, you want to open up to Daf Chav Tes Amid Beis, 29b, which is the beginning of the third parak. And we're focusing our attention on two categories of Psulei Daled Minim, of disqualifications. One is called Gazul, it was stolen, and the other is called Yavesh, it dried up entirely. And the Gemara assumes that since the Mishnah didn't qualify, when it establishes these Psulei Lulav, and again, these Psulim apply to all four minim, it applies straight across the board for all 7 days of the Chag. And we keep in mind that the first day is Doraisa, whereas the balance of the Chag is Durabanan. But if the Mishnah doesn't qualify, then it means all these disqualifications apply throughout the entire Sukkot. And the Gemara doesn't understand why Gazul, a stolen lulav, should be disqualified during the course of the Chag. And the Gemara says the following: Bishlemi Yavesh, which is 4 lines up before the end of Chav Tes Amid Beis. Hadar be'inin v'leka. We understand that there's a psul hadar, which Rashi identifies as Zekelu Yavehu, as a mitzvah muderes, and that should apply straight across the board for all 7 days. Ela Gazul, but in the case of a stolen lulav, which is a beautiful lulav, that's probably why it's stolen, is Bishlem Yontif Rishon Tsiv Lachem Bishal Lachem. The Torah says L'Kachtem Lachem. You don't own it; it belongs to Reuven, and Shimon stole it from Reuven. Shimon can't use it for the first day of Sukkot because it's not Lachem; he doesn't own it. El B'Yontif Sheni, which refers to the entire balance of Sukkot. Amai Lo. Why should the lulav hagazul be puzzle for all 7 days of Sukkot? And I could give a little bit of extra oomph and strength to the Gemara's objection here, because in the case of chaser, which means that a piece of the esrog was taken off, that esrog, although it's puzzle on the first day of the Chag, because it says ulakachtem, is kosher for the balance of the Chag. So if there's something that's a psul hadar, the Gemara feels that should passel it for all 7 days. Whereas if it's only a psul derived from a lekachtem, then that psul should be limited to the first day, where it says lekachtem, and should not be extended to apply to the balance of Sukkot. Now the question arises, why is hadar, in the case of Yavesh, such a fundamental psul that it disqualifies the lulav, or for that matter, the other minim, for the entire balance, even for the drabanan days of the 7 days of the Chag? What's the difference between hadar, which the Gemara understands to be a disqualification throughout, whether it's dorais on the first day or drabanan on the balance of the 6 days, and ulakachtem, which is only a psul on the first day and should not be applied to the balance of the Chag? And that's actually the subject of this Tosfos on the bottom of the Omid Be'inon. We're not going to study this Tosfos now, but just as a matter of intuition, to differentiate between hadar as a psul and ulakachtem, we can say the following: that hadar is a basic psul in the hefta, the object itself. And the Torah is basically telling me that a lulav, like an esrog, has to be hadar. The Torah defines and describes an esrog as pre-eitz hadar. That's what defines the daled minim. We don't find this anywhere else. We don't find the word hadar in the mitzvah of tzitzis, in the mitzvah of tefillin, in the mitzvah of ner Shabbos, ner Chanukah, or matzah. There's no other mitzvah that requires hadar. But in the daled minim, the Torah requires hadar. And that defines what is unique about the daled minim and makes them kosher for the mitzvah of Netilas Lulav. It's got to be Hada. And the Rabbanan, with regard to the balance of Sukkot, are not going to create a brand new mitzvah. They can be makil and lenient and drop a requirement, an outside external condition, but they wouldn't drop the basic definition of the chefta of the mitzvah and create a whole new chefta. But when it comes to lekachtem, that's already an external kind of requirement. It doesn't really define the daled minim as a chefta. It's only that the lekicha should be a certain kind of lekicha. And that applies only on the first day and not on the balance of the 7 days. That's how the Gemara understands it. And therefore, if the Torah says lekachtem, you have to own the lulav, that requirement is limited to the first day, and the Gemara sees no justification for the Mishnah extending the psul of gazul, of a stolen lulav, to the balance of the chav. And in order to give an answer to this question, the Gemara feels it's got to invoke a principle of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and here we move over to Daf Lamed, and we're going to explain why a lulav, which is stolen, is possible all 7 days. Mishum dahavale mitzvah haba'a ba'avera. I don't know exactly how to translate this, but let's give it a very simple, shall we call it a superficial translation. A mitzvah that comes through an avera. You did not have a lulav. How are you going to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav? And you decide the only way you can get access to a lulav is by stealing the lulav. So the mitzvah itself comes through and is made possible by the Avera. How does Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai know that if this mitzvah was made possible by an Avera, it's possible? Shenemar, and now we go through all of Tanakh till the end of Tanakh in Malachi. And there the Navi is giving tochacha to Klal Yisrael, especially to the Kohanim. Again, Don, don't get insulted. But the Kohanim apparently were laid back about karbanos. And they were so laid back that they brought stolen animals onto the Mizbeach. They vesem gazul, the esa piseach, the esa chola. And then the pasuk says, ha'ertze zos miedchem. Do I want such a carbon? A carbon that's either gazul, piseach, or chola. Piseach means the legs of the animal were broken. And chola means the animal is so ill that it can't even stand on all four. That's how ill it is. And these animals, either pisech or chola, are classified as Baal Mum. And a Baal Mum, an animal with a serious injury or blemish physically, is completely excluded from the Mizbeach. But the Navi adds a third category here, which cannot be classified as a Baal Mum. There's nothing physically wrong with it, and that is an animal that was stolen, a guzzle. Now, again, if you're interested in the psychology of it, why would a person steal an animal and bring it on the Mizbeach as a carbon? It sounds like a warped attitude, but a carbon was very expensive. Even today, you want to bring a par for a carbon, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So he figures, all right, I have to bring the carbon. They're going to force me to bring the carbon. I'm obligated to, so I might as well steal a carbon in order to bring the carbon. And the Navi is establishing that that carbon is possible because it was stolen. And how do I know it's possible? Because in one breath, the Navi joins together Gozel with Piseach. Piseach meaning an animal that has broken legs. Gozel Dumya de Piseach. Apparently, the Navi implies an analogy between Gozel and Piseach. What's the substance of that equation, of that analogy? Ma Piseach Leslie Takanto, Af Gozel Leslie Takanto. Now let's understand. In the laws of Gzela, there is a requirement of Kinyone Gzela in order to allow the Gazlan, believe it or not, to acquire ownership on the stolen animal or the stolen object. And the question as to how and when he acquires ownership, which is called Kinyone Gzela, is one of the most complicated issues in all of Shas. There's at least one entire chapter in Masechet Bava Kama that's exclusively dedicated to this issue. And just to give you a little familiarity with the terminology here, there's something called Yerush, there's something called Shinui Hashem, there's something called Shinui Bailim. All these are different categories and abstract principles and concepts that move towards Kinyon Gzela. So the first is called Yesh. And that means that the Nigzal, who is the victim of theft, makes a declaration, Vai li, woe to me, Michisarim Kiss, from the fact that I lost something of value. Once he makes that declaration, that's called Yesh. He despairs and gives up hope of ever getting back his animal, retrieving it from the Gazlan. And that's the first level projecting towards Kinyone Gzela. And in fact, there's one opinion according to which immediately with Yerush, the Gazlan acquires ownership on the object that he stole. Because what prevents the Gazlan from acquiring ownership? It's the fact that he's obligated in Veheshiv Gzela Shar Gazel. He has to return the Gzela. And that connects him, like an umbilical cord, connects the object back to the Nigzal, to the one who was stolen. But once the Nigzal gives up hope, that's called Yesh, that's a legal concept, not just psychological. And as a result of Yesh, according to one man Diyomar, the Gazlan now no longer has a Chiv Hashava. He's not obligated to return the object that he stole. He has to pay up its value, but the object itself, he doesn't have to give back because the Nigzal was Nisyayesh, he had Yerush. And that's called in the language of Shas, Yerush Bichdi Kanile. Yerush alone is Kona for him, meaning for the Gazlan. Now, in effect, what happened to the chayfetz of Hanigzal, the stolen object, is it went through two stages. At stage number one, when it was first stolen, it belongs to the Nigzal. At stage number two, the Gazlan acquires ownership, and the Nigzal could never get back his object. It's out of his rishus completely, and it's now possessed by the Gazlan. And this is very counterintuitive, where I don't know if there's any parallel in any other legal system. I simply don't know. You can Google it and find out. I doubt it. I think this is very unique to the halachic system, that a Gazlan could actually acquire ownership over the stolen object. Again, he's going to have to pay for it, but the physical object is his. Now we have mitzvah baba vera. There's something in this object, namely a stolen lulav or a stolen animal that you want to use for a carbon, that is antithetical to a mitzvah. The mitzvah came about through the Avera. But it means that the object that you're using, the lulav for dalminim or the behemoth for a carbon, is still somehow connected to the original Maisa Avera, the original Gzela. And one could ostensibly argue that the animal or the lulav remains guzzle, it remains averidik, if I could use that term, and is connected to the gzela, the stealing, as long as the gazlan has a chiyuv hashava and he's required to return it to its rightful owner. But the very moment that the owner gives up hope, that's called yeush. At least according to one man, the over yesh b'chti kani, the object is no longer stolen. I mean, it is the stolen object. Nobody can deny that. But legally, it doesn't have the law and the status of a stolen object, because the essence of a stolen object is that the gazlan cannot acquire ownership. He's got to return the object to its rightful owner. But after the gazlan, achieves the kinyan, and now the object is no longer returnable, meaning it's not, there's no obligation whatsoever to return it. And on the contrary, the object now belongs to the gazlan. At that point, one could ostensibly, intuitively argue it's no longer a mitzvah baba vera if after the gazlan acquires ownership over the object, he no longer has to do it. And then he uses it for a mitzvah, that could be a kosher mitzvah. And it's no longer mitzvah baba vera because the entity of Gazel and its status and its name, its its categorization is no longer relevant. And the Avera is long forgotten as far as the mitzvah is concerned. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and says, Faker. The exact opposite is true. Ma pisech lesle takanta. The Navi, Malachi, equated Gazel to Piseach to tell me that just like Piseach, lesle takanta, the limbs are completely broken. Af Gazel lesle takanta. Once this object, this animal was stolen, it has no takana. There's nothing you can do, put it in the mikvah, there's nothing you can do that could cleanse and purge the shame Gazel, the shame Avera from this animal that was stolen. Loshno lifnei yeush, v'loshno li achar yeush. Even though the nigzal, whose animal was stolen, was misyayish, by lilach hisarin kis, he completely gave up, he despaired of any hope of returning his object. And at that point, according to one mandiyom, we're not sure if this Gemara is going according to that mandiyom. But again, according to one mandiyom at least, it's no longer Gazel. With Yeush, the Gazlan has acquired ownership over the object. And as we say in Yiddish, the Hersta Meister. Did you ever hear such a story in your life? That just because the Migzal gave up hope, let's say, for example, he knows that the Gazlan is a member of some terrorist organization. You don't have to take that literally, but he's wanted dead or alive. Picture is up on a poster in the post office. He's not going to get it back from this mafioso guy. He gave up hope. And as a result, the Gazlan acquired ownership over the object. Nevertheless, he can't use it for a mitzvah. He can't bring it as a carbon on the mizbeh. It still remains possible. Dumya de pisech, ma pisech lesle takanta, af Gazel lesle takanta, loshna lifnei yeush, v'loshna liachar yeush. So the Gemara clarifies this. Bishlem, I understand lifnei yeush. Adam ki yakriv mikem ka'omar. The Torah says it's got to be mikem. It's got to be your animal. A stolen animal before Yeush has to be returned to its rightful owner. and the Gazlan doesn't own the animal. It's not Mikem. The Torah says, Ki Yaakov Mikem. It's got to be your karma. It's not his. It's like Ulakachtem in the first day of Lulav. Lavdi Devu, it's not his. El Oliacher Yeush. But why can't the Gazlan bring this behemoth on the Mizbech as a carbon after the Nigzal was Misyayish? If I hold Yesh B'chli Kani, and the Gazlan has now acquired ownership over the object, Hakanya B'Yeush. Once the Nigzal was Misyayish, the Gazlan was Kona the object, it's his. So what are you going to quote me the pasuk? It says Mikem. It's got to be your carbon. It is his carbon. He owns it. He can work the animal, and if the animal is a female cow and produces milk, he owns the milk. If the animal gives birth to a vlad, he owns the vlad. So why is this animal puzzle a carbon? Even though the Gazlan has acquired ownership over the object, in this case the behemah, but nevertheless, how did he get the animal? What made it possible? What facilitated his ability to bring this animal as a carbon? How did he acquire ownership of it? It's not his animal. He didn't buy it. He didn't inherit it. He didn't receive it as a gift. He stole it. He violated the Avera of Gzela. That's the only way he was able to be Mekayim this mitzvah of Hakrovas HaBehemah. He can only bring the Behemah because he stole it. That's a mitzvah B'Aver. And that's the halacha, the principle derived from the equation between Piseach and Gozel. That just like Piseach les letakanta, so to Gozel les letakanta, even after the age. Why? Because it's a mitzvah B'Aver. How were you able to bring this animal as a carbon? You had to steal it. You had to violate the Isser Avera of Lo Sigzal. And the Avera of Lo Sigzal made it possible for you to bring the carbon.
So, Rabbi, I mean, in this week's Parsha where you couldn't bring, a carbon, that was payment for harlotry or for the dog and such, that's a different kind of concept as far as...
Let's think about your question.
Because it's a degraded kind of way of getting the...
I feel in my bones that there's a distinction, but I'm going to answer your question the opposite. Forget about what I feel in my bones. Yes, it's an excellent comparison. Steve, I think you're on the mark. Just like there's a psul of Esnan Zona, Mechir Kelev, there's a psul of Gozel, of Mitzvah B'Aver. You might ask, is this a psul Doraisa? Because Mechir Kelev and Esnan Zona is written in the Torah. Here we find a pasuk at the end of Malachi with a drasha of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai equating Gozel to Piseach in order to establish a new category called Mitzvah B'Aver, which the Gemara says will apply as a psul carbon even after Yeush, and even after the Gazlan acquired ownership and possession. It's no longer a psul chisan of Michem, it's Michem, but yet it's possible because it came through an Avera. But again, the Avera that was done to this animal that you want to bring as a carbon, again, I'm afraid to say what I'm going to say, but I'll try it anyway, is an Avera that's related to this particular person who stole the animal. If he now sells the animal to a third party, call it a fence, if you will, it could be, again, I have to research this, that the carbon is kosher. Not so in the case of Mechir Kelev and Esnan Zona. That's a psul in the Gufa Shel Carbon. And it's not because you're benefiting from the history of this animal. It was used, as you say, pay for this, pay for that. No. the carbon, the animal itself becomes possible. It's inherently a Baal Mum. In the case of Guzzle, I doubt if we would passel the animal vis-a-vis a third party. And even if you'll prove to me that there is such a thing, it's a different kind of concept. It's a Maisa Vera that shouldn't allow you to use it for a mitzvah. And I'll give you an example. We don't find any other dinim of Mechir, Kelev, and Estan Zona other than carbon. Here's the Mizbeach, Mirz Hashem, we'll have the Mizbeach, and we have to exclude these two categories. But what we're deriving here, according to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai from this pasuk of Gazel El Piseh, is a universal halacha that applies to all mitzvahs. Like, for example, lulav. Why does the Mishnah exclude lulav? Even after Yeush, he stole the lulav, the Bailim gave up hope. Therefore, the Gazlan was Kona and he acquired ownership over the lulav. It's no longer psula v'lakachtem, lachem, it's lachem, but yet it's possible. Why is it possible? Because Malachi told us that this animal that was stolen is possible mizbeach, and therefore the lulav, insofar as it was stolen, even after the Gazlan acquired ownership of it, is possible for the mitzvah of lulav. How could that be? Estan Zona and Mechir Kelev are psulim that apply exclusively to Behema and to Mizbeach. Here we're going way beyond the Mizbeach. We're talking about a lulav. We're going to say the same thing about a matzah. You steal a matzah, and again, you ask me, why would anyone steal a matzah? Go check out the prices of matzah and you'll understand. He steals a matzah, it's dumya to piseh. He cannot fulfill the mitzvah of mitzvahs achilas matzah with a stolen matzah. Tosfos is going to go as far as to say that if he eats a matzah shel tevel, which means that there's no way he can eat this matzah without violating the avera of eating tevel, he cannot be yotze with that same achila on the night of Pesach, even if it's a matzah with all the hechsherim that you would want. It's matzah shmura, it's hand shmura matzah, it's chabura shmura matzah. You paid the sky, you know, the prices were all the way up to the sky. You can't be yotze the mitzvah of matzah. Why not? Because when you eat the matzah, you violate the Isur Teva. And that makes it into a mitzvah above Avera, according to Tosfos. Other Rishonim disagree, but that's Tosfos' sheet. Now that's going way, way beyond the other psulei mizbeach. Other psulei mizbeach, we would never say, it wouldn't even cross our minds that if at the time you bring the carbon, you violate some sort of an avera of Mechir Kelev, I don't know what that would mean, that it's possible. No. Such halacha cannot be derived from Mechir Kelev or Estan Zona. That's a psul carbon. But here we're talking about a different halacha. First of all, as I said before, it applies to mitzvahs, way beyond the purview of the Beis HaMikdash and Karbonos. And secondly, it applies whenever, again, this is Shita Tosfos, whenever you violate an avera as you're doing the mitzvah. This matzah is tevel. You are violating the Isur Teva with that achila. That achila could not serve as an achila shel mitzvah because it's achila of avera, and an achila of avera cannot function and become an achila shel mitzvah. And that too is derived from Malachi's equation between Gozel and Piseh. Now again, let's notice the language of the Gemara. On the top of the Yomid, it says that a lulav hagazel is possible for all 7 days. Why? Mishum dahavile mitzvah baba avera. And the Gemara is going to clarify this and establish this based on the drasha of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where the Torah is passing lemizbeach, a behemoth that was stolen, even after Yeish. What do we gain by adding even after Yeish? Before Yeish, I don't need mitzvah baba avera. Before Yeish, it's not your carbon. The Torah says mikem. The carbon has to be brought from your animal. But if through this drasha equating gazel to pisach, Rabbi Shimon Yochai derives the conclusion even after Yeish, the gazel could not fulfill his mitzvah of carbon with this stolen animal. It must be based on mitzvah baba avera, because we're talking after Yeish. Now, I want to look with you at line 12 in Tosas Divrei Maschil Mishum. I know I'm fast forwarding, but maybe at another occasion we'll get to the first part of this Tosas. Much less important to me than V'im Toma. So let's count down from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 lines down. V'im Toma. No. 1 second, do I have it right? Yeah. V'im Tomar, Tosas quotes a sugya later on in Daf Lamed Aleph, just the next daf, regarding a lulav shel Asherah, which means that they worship this tree. And worshiping trees was very common amongst pagans at the time of paganism. A lulav taken from a palm tree that was worshipped as a deity, which is called an Asherah, the Mishnah says is possible. So you can look back on Daf Chav Tesam and Beis, and you'll see on the top line in the Mishnah Shel Asherah, a lulav shel Asherah is possible. Why? So the Gemara tells us on Daf Lamed Aleph, Mishum de Michtas Shiure. Do you remember this principle? When you have something that was worshipped as a Avodah Zarah, under normal circumstances, again, every rule has its exception, but you have to burn it. How do they say? Burn, baby, burn. If you have to burn it, then it has no shear. The minimum size of a lulav is 4 tfachim. But when you have to burn it, and it's going to go up in smoke, it's kitusei mechta shira. The shear is gone. We don't see it as having a height of its own of 4 tfachim. It's already considered like it's burnt up, because the Torah requires you to burn. So the psul of lulav shel Asherah, as established by the Sugya and Daf Lamed Aleph, is a psul of kitusei mechta shira. The lulav is lacking in a shear, because it comes from an Asherah tree and it has to be burned. We'll see this also, the same mechanism in the case of a lulav shel irani dachas. So if most of the city worshipped an idol, we have to raise the city to the ground and destroy everything in the city, including a lulav. But somebody grabbed the lulav before they got a chance to burn it, and he took it on the first day of Yom Tov, or any day of Yom Tov. And the Mishnah says it's possible, he has not fulfilled his obligation. And why? Says the Gemara, because the Kitusei Mechta Shiur, because that lulav of an irani dachas has to go up in smoke. And we view it as if it's already burned, and therefore it doesn't have a shear. Fractals, I don't understand. Why does it have to stretch its arm out to the principle of Kitusei Mechta Shiura? Typically, Mishum Mitzvah Baba Vera. I don't need to come up with Kitusei Mechta Shiura with a chiddush that since we have to burn it and therefore it's already considered burned and it doesn't have a shear. Forget about all that. We have it here in the Mishnah of Lulav Agazel, which we said is excluded and disqualified because of its Abba Vera. So why don't you read the next 3 words in the Mishnah? Let's say the next 5 words. Shel Asher Shel Irani Dachas. Possible for the very same reason that Lulav Agazel is possible. It's a mitzvah Abba Vera. Yeshlama Delo David Legazel. Why is Gazel mitzvah Baba Vera not Asherah? Because in the case of Gazel, the Machmas Averas Hagezel Ba Mitzvah Sheyotzim. What does that mean? Here I'm asking you a question. I want you to take yourself out of mute or whatever it is, and I want an answer. Why does Tosfos insist that Lulav Hagazel is excluded because it's mitzvah baba ver? What makes it mitzvah baba ver? The machmas averes hagezel ba mitzvah. Who can tell me? In Yiddish we say vashteta. What does it say here? Please help me out here.
I mean, you stole it so that you could do the mitzvah of lulav.
You're good, you're right, Steve, but say it better than that. Maybe he stole it because he's going to sell it on the open market. I don't know why he sold it. And then he decides he doesn't have another lulav, he's going to use this lulav. But look at the words of Tosfos. The machmas averas hagezel ba mitzvah sheyotze bo. What does that mean? Machmas averas hagezel.
I mean, stealing it allowed you to perform the mitzvah.
Correct. Why? Because you have no other lulav. I didn't know that was the case in our Mishnah. But now that I read the Tosfos that machmas averas hagezel ba mitzvah, it's like if I could give a mashal, you have a parent and you have a child. The child comes into the world because of the parent, as a result of the parent. The parent, mother, father, bring the child. That's called holada. They gave birth to the child. As far as your mitzvah of lulav, what gave birth to the mitzvah of lulav? It was the Avera of Gezel. You had access to absolutely no other lulav, Tosfos says. And this lulav became accessible to you for the purpose of shake your lulav on the yontif of Sukkot because of stealing. It was impossible for you to obtain a lulav without stealing it. Maybe this was the only lulav in the entire city, and the so-and-so who owns the lulav is not willing to sell it at any price. You offered him hone to our phone. No, I'm not selling. So you went ahead and stole it. There's no other lulav in town. And they say it's the only act in town. That's mitzvah baba. Now let's go back to Asherah. You have a lulav tree, a palm tree, and it was worshipped as avodah zarah. Now you take a lulav off the tree and you use it for the mitzvah. Is that mitzvah b'avera? Why not? The Gemara says, well, no, it's another problem. It's kituse mefta shiura. We're going to have to burn it, blah, blah, blah. Why isn't it mitzvah b'avera?
It's not a lulav.
No, but I'm asking. If
But
we
it's
define mitzvah b'avera as machmas havera ba'a ha-mitzvah, can you apply that to the case of Asherah?
I would say no, because that lulav isn't even a lulav, because it's from an Asherah. It doesn't
Why isn't it
exist.
a lulav? It looks exactly like any other lulav. It's a beautiful lulav. It's got 4 tfachim. No, there's no nifritza olav or a niktam rosho. It's a perfectly good lulav. Why is it a lulav? Somebody worshiped that lulav as avodah zarah.
So it's destined to be destroyed. It's as if
Good.
it's already
So
destroyed.
says, well, forget about destined to be destroyed. I can obviate that entire logic of destined to be destroyed, and I can simply plug in, just as I did in a lulav agazel, the principle that disqualifies a mitzvah because the mitzvah ba'avera. Do we understand now why Asherah would not qualify under this category of mitzvah ba'avera? In the case of Gazel, I'm going to go over it one more time because I know you guys are brilliant, so I don't have to hack it into your brains. In the case of Gazel, there was only one lulav in the entire city, in the entire world. The guy was unwilling to part with it. The only way that you were able to get this lulav, I don't mean you, Kasha, was by stealing it. That's called in the language of Tosfos, machmas havera ba mitzvah. It was the Avera that made it possible for you to do the mitzvah. Is that true? Could you apply that definition in the case of Asherah? So what's the answer? Everybody together?
No.
No. I only get one no. I don't know. I was hoping to get 3 no's. Have a little choir over here. Let's say he hadn't worshipped this lulav. Would he have been able to use that lulav for his mitzvah, even if it hadn't been worshipped? And what's the answer now? Yes, he could have used it. It's not true that because of the Avera, he was able to do the mitzvah. Coincidentally, this lulav was worshipped. There was an Avera done to this lulav. It was worshipped as an idol, as a deity. But that has nothing to do with the mitzvah of lulav. In the case of Zela, it's mitzvah ba'avera. The mitzvah comes through the Avera because he had no other lulav. The only way he could get a lulav was by stealing. But the Asherah is an Avera that overlaps coincidentally with his mitzvah of lulav. But it doesn't set up the mitzvah of lulav. It's not the cause. It's not the molid. It didn't give birth to the mitzvah of lulav. Had he not worshipped this Asherah, it would have been a perfectly good lulav. So it wasn't like he needed the worship in order to set up the mitzvah of lulav. In the case of Zela, what facilitated his access and his ability to get a hold of this lulav? He had to steal it. Is that clear? I don't know. You guys are sort of, you're held back there.
It's not clear to me. Because if the Asherah was the only one in town, the only lulav in town, why is it any different than the guy stealing it because it's the only lulav
Because
in town?
again, it wasn't done that because it was worship that he was able to use it for a lulav. Mitzvah ba'avera means I could only use it for the mitzvah because of the Avera. The Avera made it possible for him to do the mitzvah.
Ah, okay.
He had no access to any other lulav. In the case of the Asherah, if it wasn't worship, he wouldn't be able to do the mitzvah. It was only because it was worshipped as a deity, therefore he's able to take it and shake it on on Yontif? That's ridiculous. And again, the key word is machmas. You have to underline that word in Tosfos. Machmas. Mitzvah haba means mitzvah machmas haver. Machmas. What's machmas? Machmas means that without that avera, you could not have done the mitzvah. What does that mean? I couldn't have done the mitzvah of shaking a lulav without an avera? Yeah, you couldn't have, because there is no other lulav around. You had to steal it in order to get access to it. But it's not true that the avera of Asherah, insofar as this lulav was worshipped, that makes it feasible and possible for him to be Mekayim the mitzvah of lulav? That's not true. There's a coincidental overlap of the avera on this lulav, but that avera is not in any way, you can't pinpoint it as the cause of lulav. It didn't set up or make it possible, feasible for me to take this Asherah lulav as a lulav, drop the mitzvah, and I would have been happy to take the lulav without the avera of Avodah Zarah, without having it been worshipped. That's what it says here in Tosfos. Avolhani, but in these cases of a stolen animal for the mizbeach, a stolen lulav for the mitzvah of the lulav, machmas avera shenasespo, because of the avera of gezel, of stealing, be nothing. Can he be yotze with an avera that made it possible for him to fulfill a mitzvah? The Torah says, I don't want you to think that the means justify the ends. If the only way you can get to do the mitzvah is you violate an avera, okay, we're going to look the other way. We're going to allow you to do an avera in order to set up this mitzvah. No. Mitzvah bob avera, gozel. You stole it. That's what made it possible for you to do the mitzvah. That's excluded. Such a mitzvah is not accepted. The Torah doesn't want a mitzvah that became possible because of an avera. In the Havamina, when Tosfos raised this question, why do we need Kintuse Mechta Shira to disqualify a lulav shel Asherah? Let's just say simply it's a mitzvah b'av avera. Tosfos had a whole different definition of mitzvah b'av avera. If the avera was done to the lulav, then we can't use it for a mitzvah. The avera makes it like an impact on the lulav. It gives it a bad odor. You know, when you come in front of the Ribono Shalom with a lulav that has a bad smell to it, it's got the shmek of Avodah Zarah, you know. Then that status of the lulav as a chefta of Avodah Zarah, that precludes it. That makes it a mitzvah b'av avera. Don't bring a mitzvah from something. You know, you shake this lulav, and this lulav is a lulav of avera. That's what Tosfos thought in his hobby. Tosfos says in the answer, no. That's not mitzvah b'av avera. Mitzvah b'av avera means that without the avera, you couldn't have possibly done the mitzvah. It was the avera that made it possible for you to do the mitzvah. That applies to Gozel, but has no application in the case of Asher. No one could say that because it was worship, that's what made it possible for him to take it as a lulav. Now let's again, we don't have too much time. I want to fast forward to the end of Tosfos. Umiu Tema. Let's see if we can count from the bottom of the Tosfos 1, 2, 3, 5 lines up and change. Afilu Miu Tema. Do you have that? If you don't, you don't object, then forever hold your peace. You know, I'm assuming if you didn't object that you found it. Afilu Tema. I'm sorry, Miu Tema. He has a Gemara Pesachim. B'Sanya ein yotze midei matzah b'tevel. He's got tevel, which means there was no afresh and chumas of meisers. It's also b'isur chamor ma'od. It's a mitzvah. It's an avera of chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim. And now he wants to take this matzah that was made of tevel and use it for the mitzvah. The Gemara says in a brisa, ein yotze yidei mitzvah. He cannot fulfill his mitzvah of matzah with tevel. So what would be your feeling about this? What would be your intuition? Is that, why is this matzah shel tevel excluded from the mitzvah of matzah? Again, it's perfectly good matzah, beautiful matzah. It's got all the hechsherim. It's got a badatz hechsher, and it's matzah shel tambura. You paid a lot of money for it. Only one minor problem, it's tevel. Yeah?
Right, so it would be like the Asherah. It would not be like the stolen lulav.
Jeff, that's exactly what I thought. Because it wasn't the tevel that sets up the mitzvah. Had it not been tevel, you could still fulfill the mitzvah achilas matzah. And yet Tosa says, "Tepugle mishum the mitzvah b'aveh." The ka'achel isura v'nofek yedei matzah. The Gemara says himself, and the reason why matzah shel tevel is excluded is because the Torah says that matzah is the flip side of chametz, and anything that's prohibited because of chametz, had it leavened, can become matzah. Matzah is the potential of chametz with a lav of yochel chametz. He arrested the leavening, the process of fermentation, and he got himself matzah. But it could have been chametz. It would have been chametz had you left it for another minute. But if there's an additional Easter on top of chametz, in this case tevel, then it's excluded from matzah. So Tos says, what do I need that for? Why does it have to rack its brains and do somersaults in the air to come up with a reasoning why he did not fulfill his mitzvah of matzah with a matzah shel tevel? The answer is it's mitzvah b'avera. Should be derived from guzzle. And I don't understand Tos's kasha. Why is this ba ha-mitzvah ba machmas avera? This is a case, as Jeff said before, of an overlap of Isur tevel with mitzvahs matzah. They happen to coincide. But if it wasn't tevel, he would eat it as matzah. He didn't steal the matzah. And we see something amazing from this Tosas. That Tosas is now expanding his definition of mitzvah b'avera to include any case where it's impossible for him to fulfill the mitzvah without violating the avera. No way, no how. He's got a matzah in front of him that's tevel. He's obligated to eat matzah. If he eats this matzah, he will violate the Yisur achilas tevel. That same achila will generate two things. When he eats this matzah, number one, he's eating matzah shel tevel b'avera, and number two, he's eating matzah on the night of Pesach for the sake of the mitzvah. Tosafos says that if it's impossible to separate the two, if with this matzah you could only be makayim the achila through an avera of achilas tevel, then it's as if the avera of tevel sets up the mitzvah of achilas matzah. I never would have said it. Okay, then Rabbi say this is where we're going to stop. Tosafos doesn't have an answer to this question. I think we have an answer to the question. That even though it's impossible to eat this matzah without violating the avera, but it's not true that the avera sets up the mitzvah and makes it possible to be mekayim the mitzvah achilas matzah. Okay, then Rabbi say we'll stop here, and we know that tomorrow I want to take a look at this Tosafos Dibra Masel Ha.